Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to see some of the leaders from FFA here as well. Thank you. It's my honor to be here. My apologies for being a few minutes late. I was over with the talking with the Senate Republican caucus and reaffirming where we're headed and how we're going to get this state working again. And we're going to be back out in the trail in a few minutes. I've got to leave. I'm going up to Eau Claire and Green Bay to talk about some of that as well. But I wanted to be here today. And Bill, thank you not only for your introduction, but thanks for your friendship and your leadership, not only amongst the Farm Bureau, but throughout this state. And we appreciate that. You know, I was in this room, you mentioned a couple months ago. It doesn't seem like it seems like a couple years ago sometimes, but a couple months ago. And it's a good reminder on days when things, for any of our lives, not just for me, are a little bit tough. But I think I'd mentioned in the good book the story about Peter trying to walk across the water and suddenly sinking in. And it was all because he looked at the waves. He looked at the things beneath him, the troubles in his life, instead of looking out where the hand was extended. And that's exactly what made me think of that day. So for any of us going through troubles, and I know, again, we have our challenge in state government, but I know for many of us around the state, one of the things I mentioned in my address, fireside chat a couple weeks ago, was the story about some of the good, decent workers in state government, in our case, who worked for the Farm Center, who had reached out a month or two back when there was a couple farmers who, in particular, a family who was facing some pretty dire straits with their family farm. They were looking on the brink of bankruptcy, looking at losing the farm, and really were considering some very poor personal decisions about how to resolve that. And our staff over there, as Ben Bransell passed on to me in our weekly updates, spent the time sitting down with them, walking through their options, talking about some alternatives, talking about some things, and I think at the end of the day, not only help someone's life, in that case may very well help save someone's life. And I bring that up both to show you that I understand there are tough times in our state's economy, particularly for many of our friends in agriculture, just as there are in manufacturing and other areas across the state. But I also bring that up on the upside because it just shows the decency of the people in general in our state, and in particular the professionalism of the men and women who work at both the state and in our local governments all across Wisconsin. So many times this debate has somehow been manufactured outside of Wisconsin to mean that somehow this is a debate against public workers. It's not. We have good, decent people who work in state and local government. We need to continue to honor and respect them. What we're talking about is making sure that all of us, whether we work in government or outside of government, can continue to move this state forward, and we're trying to do it in the best way possible. You know, I was also thinking in your introduction that I'm obviously, before this job, was the Milwaukee County Executive, but for many years I grew up back in the 80s and 70s in Delavan, relatively small town, about 8,000 people, down in Walworth County, and my dad was a preacher there. But before that, I lived for a little bit of time, from 71 to 77. I lived in a town about 450 called Plainfield, Iowa. In fact, some of you know this little trivia. My state assemblyman back then in the early 70s was a farmer just down the way from our home in Plainfield by the name of Chuck Grassley. He's now the U.S. Senator from Iowa, a good man. But I remember in those days, and I thought about it a lot in the last month or so, is I remember my dad's church, the majority of the deacons who were on the council, majority of people in our church were either farmers or they had something to do with agriculture in our community. And I remember there were a lot of times when our church faced some tough financial times. And it was always amazing to me to see the deacons, most of whom were farmers, who didn't relish in making the tough decisions, but who in the end knew they had to make tough decisions in order for our church and ultimately our community to survive, and did it the way I think we expect in the Midwest. They were strong, they were firm, but they were compassionate about it along the way, and they made sure we got through the tough times. And that's what we're looking to do here in state government. That's what we're looking to do to move the state forward. And for me, one of the best things, and why I was so honored, even though I'm crammed in between a couple of different stops here, why I wanted to come and talk to you today, is because I know, looking out at the horizon, we're going to get this state working again. I know it. Today's numbers we talked about from the Department of Workforce Development already show us in the first months in this year, we've already started to see some positive news in terms of an uptick in the unemployment rate being down and the number of jobs being up. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's why I often carry around a sticker as a good reminder. I had this up the first night I won election, but it says, Wisconsin is open for business. And the reason I carry this around is, on that first day, the first night I won election, I wanted to put that out there instead of my name or a brown bag sign or something else, because I said it's not about me. It's about what we're going to do to get the state of Wisconsin working. And it started out with symbolic changes as we were in the transition. It talked about reaching out with the Farm Bureau and some of the other ag-related groups that are here and other groups across the state that want to get people working again. And we reached out. And I think you saw it early on, and you heard from him earlier with Ben Bransell, my friend and former colleague when we were in the legislature together, who I think had a tour before being a great ag secretary under Tommy Thompson, and now he's doing a tremendous job for us at DATCAP. He's put together a great team. And we want to be good partners with our allies throughout all the different organizations that are represented today, but most importantly, with all of you who represent the farmers and the farm families of this state. Because we know that farming is more than just a business, it's a way of life. And we want to make sure that we make it easier for you to farm and for your families to farm and for you to pass it on from one generation to the next. Make it easier for you to help in the ag community as we seek to increase the number of jobs available. We know we're leaders. Last night I was with the Tourism Federation at the Governor's Conference on Tourism, and a week ago I was with the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and it's appropriate because you see over the last nearly 163 years of our state's history, it's been manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism that has built the state's economy. We know it's nearly a $60 billion business. We know we lead the way. In fact, last night when they did a toast with wine, I held up my cranberry juice because I know we're the #1 producer of cranberry in the world right here in Wisconsin. And I told the guys from Massachusetts about that too when they claim Ocean Spray's all from Massachusetts. I said, no, it's from our cranberries right here. But I know whether it's that or our cheese or our milk or our pork or our potatoes in which when we helped, we're going so well that we actually helped the famine in Russia. When I look across the board and I say we have incredible opportunities to grow when it comes to agriculture and to put more people to work, but the best way to do that is to be a partner and to show that the government at both the state and the local level can help and not hinder your ability to grow on your farm and for our dairy producers and for everybody else out there to grow this business, to grow this opportunity, to expand and go beyond the 1 out of every 10 jobs and the $60 billion impact that you have on our state's economy and grow it. We're committed to doing that. I think you saw that in this budget. I'm sure Ben talked about it a little bit, but making a firm commitment, giving you the kind of relief, making sure we put forward a budget that put more of an emphasis on a whole series of programs that in the past have been in Commerce, instead are now in DATCAP. So it's directly linked to the agriculture community. Making sure we do what we said we were going to do and not raid things like the Transportation Fund or the Ag Cleanup Fund or Chemical Fund and things of that nature, but instead keep that money in those segregated accounts where it belongs. Making sure we made a firm commitment in this budget to restoring what had been raided in the past in the Transportation Fund. Some folks say, well, is that just about transportation jobs? Well, certainly it is about transportation jobs, but we know it's a whole lot more. Folks are always amazed, even when you go in the rural parts around the state, how much of our state highway and county trunk road and local town road systems are paved. And that's because we have a great tradition in this state that comes of our dairy industry and the fact that we know to get our product not only around the state but around the region, we've got to have a good transportation system. And we've turned that around in this budget. We made a commitment because we know it's key to the state's economy. We're going to continue to do that. We know as well, in addition to things we've included in the budget, we made sure that we didn't balance it on the backs of our hardworking property taxpayers. We know that for taxpayers in general, but particularly those who are farmers, we know the impact that property taxes growing out of relief would have in terms of not only your family but on your business. We made the commitment to say we're going to not pass that on like other states are through higher property taxes. We've also said through this battle I'm having right now, we're not going to pass it on through forcing local governments to lay off massive numbers of employees in the schools and our local governments. We're doing something different. We are leading the way. We are showing true reform, just like Tommy Thompson did with welfare in the 1990s. We're showing we can be different. We can be a leader here. And instead of doing what nearly every other state in the country is doing, which is cutting billions of dollars from schools and local governments, but giving them no tools to react to that, no tools but to pass it on through massive layoffs or massive property tax increases, we're saying neither of those two are good options. Instead, we're asking for modest changes so that all of us, myself included, we'll pay a little bit more for pension, a little bit more for health care, but in the end, ensure that we don't have layoffs at massive levels and we don't have property tax increases that would be devastating to all of us, but particularly for all those in farming and agriculture in this state, because that, for the land you own, you know it. Just adding a little bit more would have a tremendously negative impact. We don't have a property tax increase in this budget. We don't have tax or fee increases. We've made a commitment to say to make it easier for you to do business in the state, we need to give you the tools to do precisely that. And along with that, in addition to things we put in addition to the protections we have for taxpayers, the other big thing we do in this budget is maintain, and in our commitment not only in the budget, but throughout the next year and a half in the legislative session, we maintain our commitment to things that have made agriculture strong in the state. I've said it before as a candidate. I say it again as governor. I am firmly committed and will stand in the way of anyone who seeks to change farmland use value assessment. That has been a strong tool for protecting our farmers, and as long as I'm governor, that will not change. For us, it's important to make sure that we maintain use value assessment. We maintain the strong strides we made in terms of right to farm legislation to ensure that you're not overcome by frivolous lawsuits. We were proud. One of the first things we passed in our legislative agenda in the special session early on in this year was the repeal of the state tax on health savings accounts, which some people said, oh, is that a tax break for businesses? You all know it's not a tax break for big corporations. It's a benefit for individual sole proprietors. It's a benefit for workers. And most importantly, it's a benefit for family farmers who want one more tool to have access to affordable health care without having the state pile on with higher taxes. We are committed to all those things, to making sure that livestock siding legislation continues. All those things that have made us strong up to this point and will make us even stronger in the future, we will continue to work together with you on to make sure that Wisconsin remains strong. The last thing I want to tell you before I got to sneak out, well, two quick things. One off, I just want a reminder, because you talked about the clouds bill, and I want to tell you, I'm looking at the horizon. And I know that we're headed there, because I remember, back a generation ago, 25 years ago, in 1986, we faced almost identical circumstances to what we face today. Remember that. We had a tough economy, we had a tight budget, we had all sorts of challenges, and a good friend of mine from Elroy by the name of Tommy Thompson came along, and he said, you know what? This is Wisconsin. We can do better than that. And in his first term, he brought bold new leadership. He challenged the status quo. People forget about that because it was a long time ago. But he challenged the status quo in this capital and across the state. And by the end of his first term, those policies helped the people of this state create 258,000 new jobs. If we could do it a generation ago, I have no doubt we can and we will do it again today. Because I don't know about you, but I got two high school sons, and I, for one, will not stand for the prospect that they don't get to grow up in a state at least as great as the Wisconsin I grew up in. The last thing I just leave you with is this. I look around this room as I'm talking, I see a lot of heads nodding, and some people might say, well, that's because you're preaching to the choir. But as I mentioned, my father was a preacher. He's long since retired, but growing up, I remember down in Delavan, one of the other preachers was asked, Pastor, why do you preach to the choir? He said, it's real simple. It's real simple. I want the choir to sing. So what I'm asking you today, if you don't do anything else as you leave Ag Day, as you leave this trip to the Capitol, you go back to your communities. You go back to church, you go back to the chamber, you go back to the Rotary, you go back to an FFA meeting, you go back to whatever else it might be. And you help us sing by sharing the message that Wisconsin is open for business. Not just because of a new governor. It's because there's a new mindset that working together, we can do what it takes to get this state working again. That's what we need more than anything else. You all know this. We make decisions about investments, about growing our businesses or growing our farms or expanding our opportunity, not just because someone on the national and state level says it. We do it because we talk to other people in our communities. We talk to other people we know around the state. Bill knows us talking to other leaders around the country. You do it because you hear about good things that are happening in certain regions, in certain states, in certain areas. I need you to be the choir that goes around the state and really around the country and around the world in many cases and tells people that something different is happening in Wisconsin. We've got a new entrepreneurial spirit. We've got a new attitude. We've got a new approach, and working together, we're going to show that we can exceed those 258,000 jobs that Tommy was partially responsible for back a generation ago. We're going to exceed that with 250,000 plus of our own, and you're going to be an integral part of making that happen. It has been in the history of the state. Agriculture will continue to be at the forefront of economic development, and as long as I'm governor, you've got a partner when it comes to ag in the Capitol. God bless you, and thanks for having me come by. you.